Hey guys, this is Hunter Levine, and thank you for listening to the Captain's Collective podcast, brought to you by Skinny Water Culture, Hell's Bay Boatworks, and Orvis Fly Fishing. Recently, I was spending some time in Mosquito Lagoon, and after a great morning on the water with my friend and local captain, Justin Price, I was invited over to Flip Pallot's house to sit on the porch for a warm conversation. Flip and his wife, Diane, have a beautiful home nestled in the Florida oak hammock. And during our conversation, you can hear some happy cicadas in the background, a few cardinals, and even a couple young kids running around having a fun water day. In this podcast, we discuss what Flip calls Florida values, the history of outdoor innovation, the early days of his childhood exploring the Everglades, and how a chance meeting on an airplane led to the legendary show Walker's Cay Chronicles. Flip also shares with us an incredible brisket recipe for the Traeger and some heartfelt stories about his friend Jose Wejebe. We hope that you enjoy. This is the Captain's Collective.
He's out there.
I'll say it's anything you choose, I think it picks you. You know, it's genetic.
Let everything else stop in the world and just be quiet. And it's amazing where your mind goes at that point, and where it doesn't go. And sometimes just that quiet space is what we need, and especially in this day and age.
If you have a fly rod in your hand, it's this tool that takes you to beautiful places. You meet hopefully wonderful people, and it's just this cherry on top of this outdoor adventure.
When the fish is coming, that shot within a shot, that timer starts. Beep, 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 beep.
No one else knew anything anyway, and you just definitely making it up as you're going along. But
so what Grandpa and Dad would tell me is like, all right, where's the old big trout laying out there? Where's his shaving cream on the water? Where's he been shaving this morning at? So look for his shaving cream on the water, and that's where he's going to be.
Hey, Flip, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast and making time to sit on the front porch and talk about life and fishing and hog hunting. Before we dive into a long list of questions that I have, I'd love to hear about how you first got into the outdoors.
Well, I lived in South Florida at a time when it was very rural. And so the outdoors was near at hand for us. I didn't have, my dad was a full-time dad, trying to earn and provide, and he didn't have disposable income or leisure time to take us hunting or fishing, but we found other people to help us along with that. And because the outdoors was so accessible, I mean, we lived on the edge of the Everglades. And Dade County, which is now a huge megalopolis, had about 85,000 people when I was growing up.
Wow.
In the whole county. Wow. So it was entirely rural, and the people who lived there, for the most part, had traditional Florida values. Today, everyone is from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And it's which is what makes it so difficult for us to preserve anything in the state of Florida, because there are no Florida traditional Florida values.
What would those be?
Well, people who a set of values that attaches significance to the quality of water. Mm-hmm. That's probably the biggest thing. Mm-hmm. And landscaping. I mean, when I grew up in South Florida, the landscaping was all South Florida vegetation. When I drive through South Florida now, I see plants and mature trees and things that I have no idea what they are or where they came from, and it changes the horizon. Mm-hmm. And it changes the foreground until, honestly, it's dizzying. Mm-hmm. When you're someone who came from there at a time when everything was natural. It's it's shocking to leave this area where I live, a hammock in Central Florida, and drive down to South Florida and see everything that's happened to it since I was a boy. It's scarcely worth going.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you were first getting into the outdoor world, was it pretty well-rounded, or was there something in particular that you started off hunting or fishing and targeting?
Well, we were kids. We had bow and arrows, pretty unsophisticated ones, but we all had that. And so if we weren't hunting marsh rabbits, seriously hunting marsh rabbits, it was almost any bird that we could kill. Mm-hmm. Garfish, snakes. This all happened, when we were from 10 years old on. And we had a situation too in the state of Florida in those years. If you operated farm equipment, you could get your driving license when you were 14, your regular driving license. And so my family farmed at Quincy, Florida, mm-hmm. and I would spend summers up there operating farm equipment. So I was able to get my driving license at 14, which meant that I could get a truck, which I did. I borrowed a couple $100 from my dad and bought an old pickup out of an estate. And so suddenly, at 14, there was an unbelievable mobility, mm-hmm. and the Keys were right there, and the Everglades was right there, and I had a truck. And so my friends had a truck. We had a truck, mm-hmm. and we immediately put it into service to bring us deeper and deeper and ever deeper into the outdoors.
Now, when did you get into fly fishing first?
I guess I was probably, I would say, in the middle to late 50s. We were beginning to see 2 or 3 people that I had seen fly fishing in saltwater. Mm-hmm. In 59, I met Chico Fernandez, who had already fly fished in Cuba. Mm-hmm. And so he knew what it was. And so I would have to say that it would have been in the late 50s, mm-hmm. early 60s, along with Chico, another friend of mine, Norman Duncan, another friend, John Emery, and we all became enamored of fly fishing because it challenged us. We were already fishing super light tackle, mm-hmm. 2-pound test and 4-pound test spinning. Spinning was just coming to the States. Monofilament was just showing up. Mm-hmm. Nobody even knew how to tie a knot in monofilament or what its capabilities were. Mm-hmm. But we knew that the lines that we had available at the time did not work well on spinning. And so we were forced into monofilament. And this is nothing to do with the question, but I was speaking about monofilament, and it made me remember that Norman and Chico and John Emery and I were plug casters. Mm-hmm. And Dacron line was what we used on our plug reels at the time, and they were direct drive plug reels with no anti-reverse and no drags. We used leather thumb stalls for drag, and but the stretch in monofilament, when we got to know about it, turned out to really help your casting a great deal. So we started using monofilament on the plug reels. But the tolerances of the plug reels, the spools to the casings, were not very good. And the monofilament would find its way behind the spools. And the manufacturing process for those reels, the quality control evidently wasn't very good, because you could find some reels that were great and had great tolerances, and others were abysmal. So we would haunt the tackle stores, looking at hundreds of reels before we finally would find one that had the proper tolerances that would let us use monofilament. But monofilament was a huge thing. When it came along, it launched us into a whole new era of light tackle fishing.
And you mentioned earlier that when you were first getting into the outdoors that you had certain men that helped you kind of learn the ways of, I'm guessing, navigating the Everglades and navigating how to hunt with a bow, properly stock animals, set up. Could you just elaborate a little bit more on kind of how those figures kind of played into you getting introduced to being an all-around outdoorsman?
Sure. I'm hard to relate, given what we see today, but our heroes were not basketball players or football players or baseball players or professional athletes of any kind. They existed and they had fans, but they didn't have the kind of fan base that they have today. And certainly we were not called to by any of that. Our heroes were other anglers, other outdoorsmen, and mainly, for me, my heroes were game wardens. Game wardens were, of course, a different breed then. They didn't wear patent leather shoes and a patent leather holster, and they didn't carry automatic pistols, and they would never be caught dead hanging around a boat ramp writing you a ticket for not having a pillow or a whistle or something like that. They would. That was way beneath them. These were men who wore high-top basketball shoes and jeans and a fish cop shirt. And they would sleep in 3 feet of water at night to catch you doing something in the morning that you shouldn't be doing. And one of the things that I remember about some of the ones that I idolized the most, they actually had watermarks on their jeans from the amount of time that they stayed in the water. It was, and from that watermark down, they were often wet. And these were guys who knew the woods and were totally in touch with the natural world. And although they were lawmen, they were very, very willing to share. You could ride with a game warden then. If he wanted you to ride with him, he took you for a ride. They weren't hiding behind ordinances and fear of recrimination of any kind. They were passing on the tradition of woodsmanship. And they were sharing the natural world, which was their world, and they had a definite place in that world. Today, it's totally different. Game wardens would ride around all night in airboats and on these 3-wheel Honda ATVs through the big cypress swamp, and you didn't have a chance. If you were doing something wrong, you were caught. You might as well just surrender. And they were cool guys. Yeah. So between the game wardens who were so willing to share and certain individuals, old-time outdoorsmen that I identified and probably drove crazy, trying to learn from them, and they were pretty good about taking me under their wing because I was on fire with it. And they saw that and responded to it in a good way. And so a lot of the stuff that I know is not stuff that I unearthed myself, but stuff that I inherited from someone else and was able to add to as as things changed, and the things that changed, or some of the things that changed that allowed me to build on those original building blocks, were better equipment. I mean, better equipment, outboard motors that actually would run for more than a day at a time, buggies that would get you around the woods, and better firearms, better ammunition, better arrows. It just, I mean, on and on. Better clothing, better shoes, better everything. And insect repellent. I mean, when I first started going in the woods, there was no DEET. There was no Thermacell. There was no, I mean, you rubbed lemongrass all over yourself or diesel fuel. And that was insect repellent.
Wow.
And it all changed so quickly. I guess all the people that returned from the war, from the Second World War and the Korean War, and began to take advantage of government benefits that allowed them to have more leisure time, more disposable income, better communications, magazines that featured all these opportunities. They didn't exist before then. And then individuals began to emerge. There were no seminars, there were no clubs, there were no CDs, no internet to learn on. You couldn't Google anything. The guys that, like Lefty and Joe Brooks and the people who were willing to share and put themselves out there and write articles and write books and attend seminars. And I mean, things just began to explode. And so it wasn't hard to be an outdoorsman any longer. And there were more people being drawn into it, so you didn't feel like a weirdo because you spent so much time on your own and outdoors and away from the mainstream. So it got easier and easier.
And that kind of brings me to something I wanted to hear your thoughts on. So I've had the opportunity to sit down with some guys like Nat Ragland and others who had a long legacy of fishing. And one of the things that hearing stories about how times were when they were first getting started, I've just noticed a huge appreciation for innovation, to try to figure things out and solve problems yourself or with your friends. Could you speak to how innovation kind of played into your upbringing in the past few decades of fishing and hunting in the woods?
Well, I'll flip you back to Nat Ragland, who one of my childhood friends and heroes, and one of the great innovators in the sport. I mean, and there wasn't any area of fishing, whether it was offshore for sailfish or inshore for bonefish, that Nat didn't pioneer and innovate. I guess, we're going back now to the late 50s, early 60s, and we wanted to catch fish on tackle that was designed for bass and carp in Europe. All the spinning reels came from Italy and France. That's where they all came from. So there they fished for carp and I don't know, sea trout or something.
Yeah.
So we wanted to catch amberjack and sailfish with the same tackle, and it was the same tackle because nothing else was available. We did have plug casting tackle, but that was designed for bass. So nothing was suited for what we were trying to accomplish. I mean, to catch a wahoo on a spinning reel from Italy that was designed for carp or something was a tall order. The drags, of course, were ridiculous. They were little pieces of cardboard or pressed board or felt, and they would immediately burn up at the run of a kingfish or a bonefish or anything. And so people in our circle, and I say our circle because we were the only ones that were doing it, and it might have been no more than 100 guys in the whole fraternity. Maybe not 100. There were a couple of fishing clubs in South Florida that were the nucleus of all of this experimentation. People were taking ski boats that were designed to pull skiers and family trucksters out into the Gulf Stream and crossing the Gulf Stream to the Bahamas, outboard motors that were so simple that they barely ran. I mean, you could take one completely apart with a spinnerbait. And so at the same time that tackle was being innovated, outboard motors, boat hulls, the things that you see in a technical poling skiff today all came from that time, that place, and those people.
Mm-hmm.
And if I showed you my skiff from the 70s, it would be remarkably like anything that you go pay $60,000, $70,000 for today. In terms of its interior layout. Of course, the materials have changed for the better, and methods of building things have changed, and the motors have changed, and the electronics have changed, and all of those things. But whatever you see today had its roots in South Florida in those times. And Nat was a big player in that. I mean, Nat designed boats, Nat designed tackle, Nat pioneered fishing in the Keys and in the Everglades and offshore South Florida. And I mean, I think you were lucky to get him to sit down and you know, that's priceless.
Yeah, it was a treat.
Oh yeah.
In what ways have you seen some of those things that you mentioned with that first kind of group of guys pioneering? In what ways have you seen that push on to the newer generation today?
Well, the newer generation, I mean, they're better than we were. They are. I mean, they're stronger, they're smarter. They have much better equipment than we ever had. And they're better prepared to use it because they're smarter, and they have endurance that we never had. They have knowledge that we never had. They have, for Christ's sake, GPS alone. I mean, the dues that we had to pay to learn Hell's Bay and Lane Bay and the 10,000 islands of the Everglades. I mean, that was just time on a push-pull. And time lost back there to where if you had a cell phone, you would have called for a Huey 3 days ago to lift you out of there.
Yeah.
And we were blessed with parents who knew where we were and knew we were lost, but knew we were still in Florida somewhere and would turn up eventually.
Yeah.
And so the new generation of light tackle anglers and fly fishers are doing just exactly what they're supposed to do and just exactly what's expected of them. They're doing it real well, and they're doing it at a time when the habitat is in terrible shape and the resources are in terrible shape, and it's only better equipment, more knowledge, and more youth and strength than we ever had that's getting them there. But they're there, and I mean honestly, there was a time when I could go launch a boat anywhere in the Keys or Biscayne Bay or Lake Okeechobee or, I mean, the Marquesas or the Dry Tortugas.
Mm-hmm.
And in a day, if I saw another boat or 2 or 3 boats, I would know who they were.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, first name, wave to, and there are so many people now that have equipment, have knowledge, much more leisure time,
Mm-hmm.
much more income, much better communications.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, somebody catches a tarpon in Homosassa, they know about it in the Keys within minutes.
Mm-hmm.
They've seen a picture of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been taped and measured, and I mean,
Tracked.
It's incredible what the evolution has been over such a short period of time. And it's to have watched it all happen has been swell. What leaves a bad taste is how little we've done. I include myself and everyone else. How little we've done and how little we've committed of ourselves to solving the problems that we've helped to create. I think that the natural resources of Florida are at the tipping point, perhaps beyond. But in any case, they can't be left on their own for much longer and survive. And I think that we're not nearly militant enough because we're the kind of people who appreciate nature, and we want to be non-confrontational, and we want to commune, and we don't want to get involved in the hassles of this or that. But the forces and the people who would take all of this away from us are not bashful. They're hugely confrontational. They don't mind pulling their pants down and pissing on our campfire. They're doing it, and we're letting them do it. We look at one of the things that drives me nuts is that we're focused on creating an area below Lake Okeechobee to filter out all this dirty water before we deliver the water to the Everglades. And the area keeps shrinking legislatively. It keeps getting deeper, which is non-functional. But in the end, the idea is to filter all this dirty water out. That doesn't focus on the problem, which is dirty water. And the people who are putting the dirty water into the system get a pass because we're building a filtration marsh to clean up after them. We're not focusing on stopping them because it's too big of a fight that we're not willing to get involved in. It's messy, it's nasty, there'll be name calling, there'll be character assassination, and we're just let's have a settlement pond and forget about the fact that it's not going to work. In my opinion, and my opinion is based entirely on a lifetime of watching this water work and watching what's become of it. So that drives me crazy. The other thing that drives me crazy, you didn't even ask me what drives me crazy. I'm just telling you. Spraying chemicals on invasive aquatic vegetation. That is the death knell of the water in Florida. Forget about sugar. Forget about other agri-interests. Forget about golf course. Forget about everything. Focus on, I don't know if it's even possible to wrap your brain around the dollar figure that the state and municipalities and private enterprise spends on chemicals to kill invasive aquatic species. And those chemicals, we don't know much about them. They promise us that you could drink them, that they wouldn't hurt a pregnant woman, that they wouldn't, but they won't tell us what the effect is on amphibians or crustaceans or larval stages or anything else. There's no science. All these chemicals are outlawed in Europe already. They won't let you use them at all. But we're still spraying them by the tons and the metric tons and gallons from helicopters, fleets of airboats and skiffs. Every water course and every lake in the state of Florida is being sprayed to eliminate invasive aquatic species. And so they promise us that these chemicals don't kill the native species. They only kill invasive species. So I live right here on the St. Johns River to my west, the Indian River and the Mosquito Lagoon to the east. I'm 5 or 10 minutes from either. All the native grasses are gone from both. What do these water bodies have in common? Glyphosate. It kills all vegetation. I see it. I mean, the St. Johns River was one of the most magnificent rivers in the world, unique for a million reasons. It had eelgrass. As you waded out into the river, the eelgrass would come up around your waist, and it grew from shore to shore. There's not a blade of eelgrass in the St. Johns River now, not one. There's no hydrilla. There's no spatterdock. There's no duckweed. There's nothing there. There's, as the river goes down each winter, pasture grass grows further and further out into the river, and then when the rainy season comes and it gets covered, it dies back. But basically, there's no root systems at all to bind the marl. Actually, there's no marl. All that's left on the bottom of the St. Johns River is some toxic sludge, which is a combination of dead plant matter that's been killed by chemicals and whatever residual chemical residue exists in that marl. So every time the wind blows, all that stuff goes into suspension, blocks photosynthesis, turns the water into chocolate. And it used to be crystal clear. We would run the airboats upstream, throw a wake over the shores. It would break loose billions, literally billions of shrimp out of the eelgrass, and it would start a feeding frenzy of fish that would excite the fish, and the bite would be on. I don't think there's one shrimp in the St. Johns River now. And what has happened? What has changed? Spraying every day, spraying. And we pay for that. We buy the chemicals. We pay all these legions of people and helicopters and tanker trucks to support the spraying effort. And the mandate is some legislation in the Florida statutes that requires the Fish and Game Commission to eliminate aquatic vegetation. That's the mission of this legislation. That's the stated goal of the nothing about clean water. It's not mentioned in the statute. Clean water is not. Navigation and the elimination, total elimination. So we're at the point now where there's so much stuff going into our water. We need that aquatic vegetation to filter. And we need that aquatic vegetation to provide habitat. And we need that aquatic vegetation to bind the bottom and the shorelines of our rivers and lakes and retention ponds and borrow ditches and everywhere where we spray. And we need to change the mission of this legislation so that elimination, the word elimination, is eliminated from the statute. We need the vegetation, and we need to realize that it has been proven that these chemicals contribute to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is rampant in our population. And still we spray this stuff constantly. And they come with new chemicals. Now they have a new chemical, and they're promising us that it kills selectively. So where's the native vegetation? All this water, all these water courses that they spray, these borrow ditches and retention ponds in the St. John, it all finds its way to the Indian River and the Mosquito Lagoon. And all the grasses are gone. And people go, what happened to all our native grasses? Well, this is a chemical designed to kill grasses, vegetation, aquatic vegetation. So it's no wonder to me that we find ourselves in this situation. But we need to stop spraying today. We need to, and they say, well, we have to spray because if we don't, this stuff will take over the state. Well, my rejoinder to that is that I clearly remember before spraying, we mechanically harvested aquatic vegetation. They go, well, it's not efficient. It's not cost effective. We don't have the machinery to do it. We just last night sent 2 guys to the Fargan space station. Do you mean to tell me that we cannot come up with machinery to harvest aquatic vegetation? Of course we can. But it's never going to happen legislatively because these guys are tied to the chemical companies. But we could harvest this stuff mechanically. We used to use mechanical devices and prisoners. I mean, prisoners who are now sitting around watching television and air-conditioned prisons. They used to be out harvesting hydrilla. And I'm sure that we could find a way to make gasoline out of hydrilla or cattle feed or something. But, you know, we cannot continue to poison ourselves and our water supply. What in the world is it going to take to make people realize that? And maybe part of the problem is, I get back to the very first sentence of this interview, traditional Florida values. I mean, we don't have Floridians here any longer to care about it. Perhaps that's the problem. I don't know the answer, but I certainly do know what the problem is. I see it every day. And my day consists, and has for decades, of being out there every single day, observing the natural world around me. And I'm good at that. So I hope that somebody's listening to this, and I hope that it energizes some thought. But we need to stop spraying today, and we need to abandon this idea of filtering water and focus on the problem of creating dirty water.
If the game wardens that drove you around as a kid were here today, picked up one of my kids, picked up someone from the next generation, what do you think they would tell them?
I think they would be speechless. I don't know if they could tell them I don't know if they could have ever envisioned. And I don't know if I could make you understand what Florida, there's probably, as the crow flies, to the west-southwest of where we sit right now. There's a lake called Puzzle Lake. In winter, the ringbills used to come in the jet stream from Canada straight. I mean, they'd fly straight from Canada. They'd get here at daylight, and they would literally fall out of the sky. And they would go so fast in their as they fell that the trailing edges of their primary flight feathers would rattle in unison, thousands of ducks falling out of the sky to get to the hydrilla beds in Puzzle Lake. And other food that they had there. Everything was abundant then. The sky would be black with ducks. Mexico could not hold a light to what we had in Florida with regard to waterfowl. The game wardens, I mean, peregrine falcons used to follow my airboat because the airboat would spook the ducks up off the water and they could strike them in flight. They were unable to hit them on the water. It was, I mean, today you will not find a single duck there. There's nothing for them there. I mean, it's wet, but it's wet with dirty water and there's no food. And that's happened in my lifetime. I mean, I've seen literally millions of ducks that used to come to Florida between from Puzzle Lake all the way down to the Keys. I mean, just north of the Keys, on the north end of Key Largo, there were so many teal and glade ducks that it was just insane. And bluebills. None today. Not one. The grass is gone. The grass in Biscayne Bay, it was so green and long it hurt your eyes. Completely gone. So what do all these absences of grass and habitat have in common? It's pretty easy when you look at it that way. I don't have any notion what a game warden would say to kids today. It would be like that old ad, you may be too young to remember it, where an Indian walks up onto an expressway and sees trash all over the expressway, and then they close up on the Indian's face and you see a tear fall out of his eye when he sees. I'm sure that the old game wardens that I idolized would feel the same way if they had to look at what it is today. I feel that way.
One of the things as I've done these interviews over the past year or two has been the influence that Walker's Cay has had on future generations of guides. These are guys that are just starting at 19, 20 years old, all the way to guys who are well into their 50s. And I know throughout the years you've been involved in producing TV shows and articles and seminars. And I can tell through what I've seen that you care a lot about helping educate the next generation and helping share Florida values, to bring it back holistically, with people. Could you tell me about how you made the decision to get into television and to try to pursue educating others?
I guess I guided for 14 years, and it was 14 years of really, really good Florida fishing. So it was a lot easier, I suppose, to be a guide then than now. But I always felt that education would be the salvation of everything that we hold dear. I mean, it was always apparent to me that the more we exposed the thing that we loved, which was South Florida and her resources, the more danger there would be to numbers of people becoming involved. And if they weren't good stewards, it would all be gone. And so as I guided, I I always tried to leave that message. It was also my my practice as a guide. I never booked people from Florida. I mean, if you were from Florida, you could fish with somebody else. I didn't want local people who had access to this world, I didn't want them to be handed this world for the cost of a day trip or for the cost of a magazine like Florida Sportsman magazine that exposed thousands of spots and thousands of ways to do things. And so people got this information for the cost of a magazine. I never appreciated that. And I always felt as though finding it on your own was the reward, not the bonefish, not the tarpon. Although that was a wonderful part of it, the reward was the search and all that the search entailed, the equipment, the weather, the tidal information, the solar information, the tackle, the knots, everything. And the more dues you have to pay to learn those things, the more you cherish them and the better care you take of each and every part of it, including the environment. So teaching was always very important to me. How I became involved in filming, I have Stu Apt to thank for that. Stu, one of my major idols, and someone from whom I learned a million life lessons, and what I learned about fishing from Stu was huge. But Stu was involved in two film projects. One was the ABC American Sportsman. Another was the Outdoor Life series, which came along right after the American Sportsman shut down. And then Stu did a couple of film productions all on his own. And so Stu and I were friends, and Stu was a great mentor to me. And Stu got me to be a camera boat on a lot of those things, and actually at one point got me involved on camera in some of those shows. And in the process of that, I got to know a lot of those people. And strangely, my wife, who was a flight attendant for Pan Am and who flew with Stu, because Stu was a 747 captain for Pan Am when he wasn't guiding. Diane was on a flight, I think it was to Peru or Brazil or someplace in South America, Chile maybe. And she was working in first class, and a young man got on with a fly rod. I was guiding then. So she said something to him, "Where are you going? Where are you fly fishing?" And he said, "Oh, I'm going for trout in the Andes somewhere." And anyway, they developed mechanical problems somewhere in South America. I disremember. And they had to lay over for a couple of days to fix the plane, and Diane invited this young man to join the crew for supper or something like that, and they talked, and it turns out that this young man's father had invented and held all the international patents and licenses for the aerosol spray valve.
Wow.
And he owned Walker's Cay. And this young man was just getting started in fly fishing and was on his way on this trout trip somewhere. And Diane said, well, my husband is a guide, bonefish tarpon guide in Everglades, and here's his card. He gives the young man my card. He goes on and has his trip, and as fortune would have it, on his way back, Diane was making another round trip and coming back, and so she was working first class again when he got on, and she met him again. They talked. She gave him another one of my cards, and I never heard from him, but a long time passed, and he saw me on television on one of these shows that I had done with Stu. And he contacted me. And it turned out that they were trying to figure out if at Walker's they had a sufficient bone fishery to include bone fishing as part of the attraction to the island. And so they hired me to go down there and survey the flats and the fishing, and they flew me all around to, and my God, it was wonderful. I mean, it was fabulous. And then they hired me to supervise the building of a small fleet of 6 skiffs and outfit them. And there were, because of the unique location of Walker's, it's all by itself, there were no guides available. And so we identified 6 American guides from the Keys, bonefish guides, very good ones. And we made the skiffs available to them to bring their own customers over to Walker's, and the customers would stay at Walker's and pay for the fishing experience, and the guides could use the boats and the docking facilities and everything, all the facilities at Walker's. And so it worked out pretty well, and it got kicked off, and I was one of the 6, and it was really wonderful to be able to have an escape like that and something else to offer your customers. For me, it was very important because I felt like, I guided in the Everglades, I guided in all of the Keys, I guided in Lake Okeechobee for bass, Lake Okeechobee for ducks, Montana in the summers. I guided out there actually those first 6 years that the Bighorn was open to white people. I guided on the Bighorn those first 6 years.
Wow.
So it gave me yet something else to offer my customers. And I think what happened at one point, the Outdoor Life series, which had succeeded the American Sportsman, went away for whatever reasons. I imagine financial. But they employed the same format as the ABC American Sportsman. It was a fishing guide or a hunting guide somewhere, and some celebrity from Hollywood or somewhere, and that was the format. It always drove me crazy because it was never real.
Yeah.
And the people were never real. The guides were real, but they were so frustrated trying to make something realistic happen for people who, number one, had no skills, and number two, didn't really care.
Yeah.
They were just there because of celebrity.
Yeah.
And so my dream was to be associated with a show that featured real people on both ends of the skiff and feature them on both ends of the skiff, but in the middle of the skiff, feature the relationship. Most important, the relationship, because all of us have a fishing buddy. All of us have someone that's closer than a brother, closer than a priest, someone who we share things with that would never get shared anywhere else. You know exactly. I can see you're shaking your head. You know what I'm talking about. That relationship is a huge part of why we go. So that had never been featured in an outdoor program at that time. So I had the idea for the show. I knew technically the people who could bring it to fruition, the camera people, the sound people, the production people. I knew those people because Stu had given me an entree to those people. We just needed a financial partner. And so I approached the owners of Walker's with the idea of Walker's becoming the lyrical jumping off point for every episode of this new TV series, which would encompass all of these things that I had always dreamed of in an outdoor series. And they thought it was a great idea. And so all at once, we had the concept. We had incredibly talented cinematographers and sound recordists. We got my brother and my cousin to write the music for the show, so it was original music. We didn't have any canned. I mean, music was written for the show. I mean, it was huge at the time. We were doing it on film, which had a certain ambiance. I mean, the film had a glow to it that tape in those days did not have. And we had a financial partner. And we had this marvelous lyrical jumping off point we might be doing a show in Argentina, but lyrically we left from Walker's. So it was a unique thing. The other thing that made it unique was that at the time there weren't 60 other shows. And there weren't 60 other shows competing for the sponsors. And so the sponsors did not have the power to make the show an infomercial. I mean, we could subtly feature the sponsor's product. We didn't have to shove it in anybody's faces. We didn't have to, our stuff, our films were future-proofed because we did not do that. So they were as viable today as they were when we first shot them based on product exposure. I mean, we weren't using a Chevrolet, so now we got Dodge and we can't, it wasn't that. So it was a lot easier, and we could afford to have very, very high production values. You can't do that today. The time-buy model of network television is so horribly broken today, and the sponsors control everything so powerfully that you're never going to have that kind of television again, I don't think.
I guess there's some hope with people moving to online, moving off the air and moving to online resources like Waypoint and YouTube and hopefully other avenues. But there certainly was a purity. I, like many people, I didn't live it watching it, but I have watched it, and I think that there's a lot of people who, to them, it brings back a lot of great memories of what they explored in those times. And then to me, I try not to be cynical and often say, these are my good old days. This is what I'm trying to explore and experience now, but am also hopeful that maybe we can restore some of those, whether it's the values or seeing growth back in the resource, whatever that may be. Well, one of the things that did stand out to me was the relationships that you had over the years with the people that you made shows and programs with. And obviously I wanted to talk about Jose, and obviously a very special figure to many people. I'd love just to hear about some of the fond memories or characteristics that you remember with Jose.
Jose was a little kid, 12 or 13 years old, who was just on fire with fishing. He worked as the snapper boy at the Miami Seaquarium. I mean, he was feeding snapper. That was his job. And he started calling. He got Lefty Cray's phone number and started calling Lefty endlessly. And Lefty, in self-defense, gave him my number. And so he started calling me with fishing questions and ideas. And, I mean, Jose was nonstop, but very respectful and a lot of fun. And as he grew up and started fishing more seriously and decided to become a guide, I was working at a bank at the time, and Jose needed to buy a boat. He got his captain's license, needed to buy a boat, needed to buy a truck, and needed a credit card. And so I made him a car loan and a boat loan and gave him a credit card. And it was much easier to do things like that in banking then. I don't think you could do that today. But then it was nothing to it, and I had no doubt that they would be good loans, and they were. Jose was fanatic about paying his obligations. And he became a celebrated guide. I mean, he was really talented and so incredibly committed to it. I mean, and he was smart, and he was ingenious, and he was 24 hours a day. And when he got going as a guide, I was producing a series back then called the Saltwater Angler. And so I had Jose on the show numerous times. And then when I started doing Walker's Cay, I also had Jose on many, many times on the Walker's series. And then at some point, Jose became interested in television himself and asked me if I would produce his pilot for his show, which he wanted to call The Spanish Fly. And I advised him against that. He did not listen to me. And made a success out of it anyway.
Yeah.
And so he went on to do a marvelous television series for a number of years. He did it his own way. He didn't say, well, I'm going to do it just like Walker's. I'm going to do, no. Jose found his own path, and it was a great path. And Jose had this incredible ability, which very, very, very few humanoids have. Jose could peer into the camera and talk to the audience as though they were sitting on the dock with him. I couldn't do that in a million years. I couldn't. There's no way I could do it. But Jose did it normally and naturally and seamlessly, and created this whole feeling of the audience being there with him, part of the production, and his friend. I mean, Jose, that was all Jose's. I mean, nobody coached him. Nobody. That was Jose, and he was the best of us all. I mean, crazy, horrible tragedy. I imagine 4 or 5 days before he died, he and his girlfriend were here for supper. And Diane was a flight attendant for 38 years. And so she said to Jose while we were having supper, she said, Jose, I'm so worried about you with that airplane, and you have to be careful, and so many pilots die from, and Jose said, Diane, he goes, that plane, he goes, I built it myself. I built it myself. He goes, I love that plane. I go out and I sit in the evenings in a chair and look at the plane, or I sit in the plane and have a liquor drink. And he goes, that plane is the central focus of my life. He goes, you should be worried about Flip with his motorcycle. He goes, if I die in that airplane, he goes, it's perfectly all right.
Wow.
And a week later, he was gone. And I mean, I can't say it was a loss. I mean, it was a privilege to have been part of it for all of us, and a privilege for us to have watched his innovative stuff. And we, of course, wish he was still here and smiling into the camera. I mean, the most infectious smile. I miss Jose. Think about him all the time. He was great.
When you're on the boat and you're thinking about him, what is it that you miss the most?
Well, Jose was, I mean, I suppose a lot of people don't know this, but Jose was a terrible hypochondriac. Well, you could go, Jose, are you all right? And he would go, why? What? You go, well, Jose, you don't look. He'd go, what? What is it? What? When he would get a mirror, he would look and try to figure out what was wrong. And you could say anything to Jose. I mean, he was such a big, slow-moving target that he was so much fun to mess with.
Yeah.
But he had a good sense of humor. He never got mad or anything. He was, he always had a great sense of humor. And he was full of those lines like Yogi Berra where, he would come out with the craziest statements. And I loved speaking Spanish with Jose. I mean, there's so many things about Jose that I miss. He would call at any time of the night. I mean, he stayed up all night. He would stay up all night doing things. I mean, anything, playing guitar. He was a fabulous guitar player. But he would call with questions or call with ideas or just run things by you. And any hour of the day or night, he was never slept.
Well, if it's okay with you, I'd love to go to what I call not so rapid fire questions. They tend to not elicit a rapid response, but it's my way of taking a hodge of questions that I have and just kind of throwing them out there.
Okay.
So one of the things I know about you is you love your tools that allow you to go to different places and kind of have different outdoor pursuits, whether it's an airboat or a traditional bow and arrow. What advice can you give to people about focusing on what truly matters when it comes to accumulating and caring for those tools?
Order the good wine. The thing that I've learned looking backwards is that this whole thing is a blink. I mean, I look at myself in the mirror and what happened? There's no time when it comes to your stuff, order the good wine. You want a longbow, get a great longbow. Get a longbow that every time you look at it, you get a rush. Same thing about your skiff. When you push away from the dock in your skiff, you're pushing away from all of the things in life that are humdrum, and you're pushing off into the best part of your day, the best part of the week, the best part of your month. Do it in a skiff that does everything for you that you need a skiff to do. There's no time not to. You don't see it then. But looking back, all the pieces of equipment that I nursed and patched together, and I guess that's part of the learning curve, I suppose. But in the end, the bottom line is there's really great stuff out there. Use that stuff. Build on that. And don't waste precious time patching together the stock of a shotgun.
You traveled a lot of places over the years and got to fish a lot of different fisheries. What are some tips on exploring new places and how to get the most out of it?
I think some of the best parts of exploration have to do with things other than fishing. I think you just have to be open for those things. Whether it's food or whether it's the customs of the people in the places that you're going, and finding a counterpart there who might not be as sophisticated as you are in your endeavor, or he might be more so. But either way, there's something to be learned from him or her. And the fishing, as I said earlier, is part of the journey, but not the reward. And I think keeping that in perspective is really important.
What's the best meal that you've ever ate?
The best meal I ever ate was
that you can remember, at least, yeah.
Antelope.
Was it prepared a special certain way, or?
It was just grilled. But of all the things, of all the protein I've ever consumed, antelope is by far the best. And I think outdoorsmen who have experienced antelope would agree.
I know that one of the sponsors of this show, they have a segment, is Traeger. And I know, cooking has a long legacy with outdoorsmen, especially, obviously, hunters. What's your favorite thing to prepare yourself on the grill or in a pan?
Well, you mentioned Traeger, not me. But, I have always been a wood guy. I've always shunned gas and electricity and always cooked over wood and thought it was the way to go. And I got introduced, what must be now 4 years or so, to the Traeger concept, which other people have knocked off, which is what happens. But the pellet grill, the concept is brilliant. But what's really brilliant are the results and the repeatability of what you cook. If you find a way to make something that you like on a Traeger and it doesn't come out right the next time, it's your fault. Because the Traeger does the exact same thing every single time. And they've figured out how much smoke to allow relative to heat ranges. The heat ranges are very accurate. It's just like an oven. If you want to cook at 450, set it for 450. You're cooking at 450. And my nemesis has always been brisket. It's a 16-hour endeavor, and so many things can go wrong. And that doesn't even begin to include the brisket that you select and its history and everything. But Traeger has made me into a hero with my family with regard to briskets. And I get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and start and go for 16 hours and come out with the best brisket. And then, are you familiar with burn ends?
Yes, yeah. Very.
So then that process starts after the brisket is done.
Yeah.
I always buy the biggest packer briskets that I can get, a 25-pounder. And so there's plenty of burn ends.
Is there any particular spices that you like, rubs that you like?
Yeah, actually, I just made one up myself.
Okay.
It's Cuban espresso coffee.
Okay.
And kosher salt, coarse black pepper, and then I make a liquid of sorghum, really dark malty balsamic vinegar, and crystal hot sauce.
Mm-hmm.
And I put that in a spray bottle, and as the brisket is cooking, I periodically spray it and keep cooking it until the internal temperature of the brisket, the flat part of the brisket, reaches 165 degrees. And I use a very accurate thermopen to keep track of that. When it gets to 165, I quit spraying it and I wrap the whole thing in pink butcher paper and finish it till it comes to internal temperature of 205, which takes forever.
Mm-hmm.
It stalls while it's cooking, and it takes a long time. It's it's a
labor of love.
It's 16 hours of drinking beer and watching the smoke come out of a Traeger.
I guess there's worse things to do.
There are. I've done them.
So one of the things I know about you, you're most known by, I guess, most people for fishing, but I know that you have a love for hunting, and I know that you have a love for the traditional bow hunting. I listened to a podcast that you did that was specifically about traditional archery, and I thought it was really interesting just to hear that perspective from you. I'd love to know, how do you feel like traditional hunting and fishing feed each other, play off each other?
Well, I think that the way that we choose to fish and the way that we choose to hunt are in large measure the same, and different for different people. And okay, everything is okay. I use traditional archery equipment because it's archery and it's steeped in tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And mainly it's a challenge that makes me hunt better. I'm not using a device that allows me to shoot an animal at 60 yards or 80 or 90 yards. I have to hunt, and I have to be within 15 steps or so of that animal before I feel that it's an ethical situation. And so to get there, I have to hunt, which is the reward for me. I may never kill anything. I don't care. But I hunted. And I got a compound bow, and I tried it. My God, they're unbelievable. They're wonderful. I mean, it's just magical. And I get it. I mean, those things are, and it gets people out hunting. They're wonderful. And crossbows now with, I mean, all that they do and everything, also wonderful. They're great mechanical contrivances. I don't think they have any place in archery season. I think they should have their own season, and it's wonderful. But I think that archers should have a season. That's the way it started and was meant to be. Same thing with muzzleloaders. I think that muzzleloaders now are something that they were never intended to be. When primitive weapons were initiated as seasons for hunting. And I think that all of these things are wonderful things, but they don't challenge you to hunt. I shouldn't say that. That's not true. They do challenge you to hunt. I said that wrong. They don't level the playing field as nearly as traditional weapons do. And I think that that's important to some people. And because it is, and because it's traditional, I think we should have a time where we observe that, and then allow everything else, to have its place. It's the whole compound bow thing is quite amazing. I mean, all the equipment and everything that surrounds that whole, really amazing. My God, I just walk in the archery shops and look at the broadheads on the wall, the selection of broadheads that one does this and one does that, and they open up and they close up. And it's just amazing what the modern hunter can figure out.
My last question, and I love to ask this question, from time to time, is if you had a billboard and everybody entering Florida had to see that billboard, what would it say?
Go home. I'm sorry it took so long to think about that.
I've always said
Go
that.
home or bring your own water.
Bring your own water.
Yeah.
I've always said that it would be fun to eventually get the funding to take some of the answers of various people and actually put those billboards up with no explanation. I don't know if they would let us have that one up.
I'll bet you that I'm not the first one who said go home.
No, different people have nuanced it different ways, but I've really enjoyed our time together and just hearing some of how you got started, stories of Jose, and some of the things that I can tell matter deeply to you, like Florida values. And I'm grateful for just the opportunity to sit down and hope to do it again.
It was, believe me, my pleasure. Anything that causes me to think back as far as the 50s is wonderful exercise for my brain. Just before you get away, I want to say that of all the influences in my life, the single greatest influence was Lefty Kreh. And he did so much for fly fishing, and he did so much. People don't realize Lefty was a game warden. Lefty was a magnificent shotgun pointer who taught instinctive marksmanship for the U.S. Army, and Lefty was he came up with this system of teaching fly casting that brought so many people into the sport. And beyond all that, and at a personal level, Lefty was just a huge influence on my life. And I would never be here talking to you, no matter what I had ever done, if it wasn't for Lefty. And Stu Apt, both of them. But Lefty was the outdoor dad that I never had, and he was the outdoor brother that I never had, and he was an incredible friend and teacher. And I didn't want to miss the opportunity to just say that.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for this time. I really appreciate it.
My great pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks again for listening to the Captain's Collective. Please help us out by leaving a review on iTunes and sharing this podcast. We hope that you enjoy. This is the Captain's Collective.